Welcome to the Beyond Crude podcast, episode 10. We're picking up from where we left in episode 9. The last episode was dedicated to the KCB 11. These are the 11 activists that had been arrested on the 23rd of April at the KCB Uganda basement, where they had been led by one of the bank officials in the hope that they were going to meet someone to discuss why they were opposed to the East African Crude Oil Pipeline project, but instead were ambushed. And they've spent 2 months in jail now. We were looking at the litigation because of the challenges the KCB 11 were facing in court, the continued denial of bail that we've seen continuing up to this particular point. We also looked at climate litigation, and I think this is where we are going to kick off from. Joining me for this episode 10 is Juliette, who is a lawyer and working with the Friends of the Earth France, and Lucien, who is also a lawyer and working with natural justice. I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Yes, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. So my name is Juliette Renaud. I'm the coordinator of Friends of the Earth France, and we have been fighting against EACOP and Tilenga project for already 7 years, I would say, in support of the communities and civil society organizations both in Uganda and Tanzania.
And hi, everybody. My name is Lucien Limache. I work with Natural Justice and lead the programs and initiatives at the organization. Our connection to the EACOP pipeline is we are one of the 4 applicants who are currently litigating against the Tanzanian government and the Ugandan government in the East African Court of Justice, where we're hoping to get a sounding victory in our appeal case. Thank you, Abud.
Thank you, Lucien. Thank you, Juliette. Whenever you hear Tilenga or Kingfisher, understand that these are the oil fields, the oil fields in Uganda that are associated with the East African Crude Oil Pipeline. Juliette, I'll come to you. Could you kindly walk us through the fresh EACOP case in France?
Yeah, so we have already a long litigation battle history against Total. We filed a first case in 2019 together with Survie, which is another French organization, and 4 organizations in Uganda, including AFIGO that some of you may know. And the case was the very first case under a law in France that's called the French Duty of Vigilance Law. We will explain a bit further about this law later, but the issue is that the Total used a lot of procedural issue to just kill the case, and the case was indeed dismissed on a procedure. We first won on the first procedural issue after 2 years, and then the case was dismissed on another procedural issue. This was in early 2022, and the thing is that in 2022, our case that was about preventing violation to occur was already too late, because the violation had already started to occur, the violation of human rights and the environmental destruction. So instead of appealing this decision on procedural issue, we decided to file a new case, this time still with a French and Ugandan organization, but also with 26 affected community members. And this time it's a case that we filed in 2 years ago, in 2023, and that is asking directly for remedies for the violation that the community have suffered. So it is many violations that they have suffered in the framework of the eviction of the land grabbing for the Tilenga and EACOP project. So basically the fact that they were deprived from their land and didn't receive compensation for many years. They couldn't even use their land even before receiving compensation, and even after they receive compensation, the compensation is very low, so too low for them to have new lands, new crops equivalent to what they had. And also many have signed the the form to give up their land under pressure, intimidation, so without real consent. And the case also includes, and that makes also the link, the activists that are in jail are suffering. The link is also covering the violation of the rights, the freedom of speech and freedom of assembly of people in Uganda and Tanzania that are fighting against EACOP. And so in this case, it's only for the people that are plaintiff in the case. So it's several community members, but also the organization itself, such as AFIGO, which has had a lot of threat, and also Maxwell Atura, who is the director of Tasha Research Institute, and who himself has been intimidated, in jail several times, etc., because of his activism and just because of his support to affected communities.
Thanks for that, Juliet. We've had you on this podcast before, and when we had you, you mentioned something around the duty of vigilance law that allows for you to litigate this case against Total Energies in France. Do you mind explaining that in layman's language for any of our listeners to understand why you've even litigating this case in France and how it will impact Total's actions in Uganda?
Yeah, so Friend of the Earth France, we've been fighting together with other civil society organizations, trade unions in France during many years, and we managed to with this fight. There was a law that was finally adopted in 2017 after a long battle in the parliament, because of course the lobbies of transnational corporations didn't want to have this law, because this law, which is called the French duty of vigilance law, the duty of vigilance of parent and outsourcing companies. So basically, this law recognized for the first time that parent companies or outsourcing companies that are based in France, which has very big company, because the law set up a threshold for the companies concerned, are responsible to identify and prevent the human rights violation and the environmental damages that can be caused by their activities worldwide, including the activities that are carried out through their subsidiaries and subcontractors. So in this specific case, Total has created a subsidiary in Uganda, or two subsidiaries, one for EACOP and one for Tilenga. And this subsidiary also have subcontractors, like, for instance, Atacama or New Plan, that are the one that carried out the eviction process. And so we are suing Total, the parent company, in court in France for the violation that are caused by their activity, and no matter if this activity are carried out through their subsidiary and subcontractor. So this is very important because transnational corporations have been using this complex value chain or complex legal structure to escape from their responsibility. And it is a test case, because we have a dozen cases that have been presented with this new law. And so we just had the first ruling on another case, but now it's also up to the court to interpret this law. And also, unfortunately, as I said, there was a long battle in Parliament, and the lobby managed to weaken the law. So there are still also some obstacles that remain, even if we have this law, and that's why we still have this very long battle in court.
Thanks for that. Even as we are still trying to solve the issue with Lucien, I was wondering if you could also just help us understand what will success look like in this case, and if there are any precedents you think it could set for other French companies operating in Africa.
Yeah, so, well, of course, success would be that the court recognized that Total is liable for the violation that has been caused to the communities in Uganda, and so that Total is condemned to pay compensation to the communities, a higher compensation than what they receive from Total for the eviction of their land. But it's not only just the value they should have had for their land, but also what's called the moral prejudice, because they have suffered many other things like also just the anxiety of losing their land, the fact that they also have their whole lives basically that have been destroyed by this. So it's a combination about economical damage and also moral damage that we will fight in court to have Total condemn. It's also in itself just the fact of having Total condemn. We think it could set a very important precedent for project of Total in many countries. We are also fighting, for instance, against Total Megagas project in Mozambique that is always also associated with a lot of human rights violation and would be also a total environmental and climate disaster if it's relaunched. But it also would be a precedent for other transnational corporations in France to see that they cannot just hide behind their subsidiary, they just cannot continue to act in total impunity, and that if they violate rights, they have to pay. And also, we hope that it can also, because it's for us, for instance, it's a responsibility of Total to have chosen to develop their projects in Uganda and Tanzania, countries where human rights are not respected by their own governments, that you have security forces that violates rights of people when they want to oppose some project. And so it would be also very important for us that the court recognized this responsibility of transnational corporation to develop projects in countries that are dictatorship or authoritarian countries, or countries where you have where there are conflict areas, for instance.
Lucien, we wanted you to help us understand the litigation at the East African Court of Justice. So if we could just start with the basics. Why is this an appeal case? What happened when it was first heard?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 4 applicants took the 2 governments to court and filed extensive papers saying that due process and administrative legal processes between the 2 countries, when you had to undertake certain environmental impact assessments, when you had to take certain understudies, advertising that, providing opportunities for communities to respond, having effective public interest participation processes. It's kind of the general genre of why we decided to take this case to the East African Court of Justice. And of course, saying that, within the East African Court community, there are conventions that exist that the 2 countries had violated in terms of this underpinning theme about processes that were not followed correctly. Now, when we had filed that application, quite a few years ago, the Tanzanian government and the Ugandan government felt that there were certain procedural technical errors made, and so they had undertaken what is you call a preliminary objection to our papers. And that, of course, meant that any matter of the substantive parts of the case would be set aside until such time as these preliminary objections were dealt with. So the court had agreed that some of these preliminary issues were correct and had given a judgment against the 4 applicants, which would be Natural Justice, FIEGO, SEFRET, and Center for Strategic Litigation. So what we had undertaken then afterwards is we decided to appeal that particular ruling on the preliminary objections. Now, what we're hoping to anticipate at the appeal stage which is where we currently are right now, and it is only on the objective preliminary issues, is to hopefully get some sort of judgment that overturns the court of first instance, where they said they didn't agree with where they agreed with the government's preliminary objections, and hopefully to get it overturned. Some of the objections that were raised were issues around locus standi and jurisdiction. And primarily those jurisdictional issues were around timing of when the submissions were made before the court, whether the applicants had locus standi before the court, and a couple of others. So this is where we are right now with the appeal. We are anticipating that there is going to be a judgment hopefully during the course of this year. And of course, once we know what the judgment is, we'll make sure that everybody knows, what that judgment and what the outcome is. We're hoping that it is going to be successful. We've had oral arguments and hearings that were made before the court earlier this year. And we anticipate that as I said, there'll be some sort of judgment coming through during the course of this year from the appeal court at the East African Court of Justice.
Thank you, Lucien. I think so. What you're saying is that the appeal is hoping that the court will overturn the decision by the first instance division that agreed with the submissions from the governments of Uganda and Tanzania. I'm saying just this so that we can simplify it for those of us who are not familiar with the legal terms. In simple terms, is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, 100%.
Wonderful. Still on you, what does the timeline look like for this appeal, and what are any key milestones ahead that perhaps anybody following this could see and consider as a milestone?
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, the court has discretion to when it will hand down the judgment. So we anticipate that it will be coming out during the course of this year. It depends when the court will sit. So every year there are blocks set out for when the court will sit down, hear matters, and then issue judgments. And I think there's approximately between 3 to 4 a year, depending on timing. And so within one of those blocks, we will know whether the judgment will be coming out or not. So that, of course, would be the first key milestone. If the judgment is successful, and we're anticipating that it will be, then we will have the matter go back to the court of first instance, so the first court. And we will then be able to argue the substantive issues that we raised. So in other words, there was no public participation process, issues around the environmental impact assessments, issues around the various intergovernmental agreements between the two countries on how the processes were meant to be followed, and of course the violations that then follow in terms of the East African Convention. So that would then be the next milestone. And then, of course, there it's anybody's guess as to how long that would take to get a judgment. And then if there's going to be an appeal after that by, let's say, the two governments, the attorney generals of the two governments, then that might take even longer. And that would be another, milestone is the judgment, the hearings and the judgment at the appeal court for the substantial issues, if it got that far.
Thank you for that clarity. I want us to shift gears a bit. Juliet, you could tell us about the joint case that Friends of the Earth France are having together with Greenpeace around Total Energy's greenwashing.
Yeah, so we filed a case 3 years ago, another case against Total, together with Greenpeace France and another French organization called Notre Affaire à tous. And this time we are suing Total about all the communication and advertisement, the big advertisement campaign that they developed in 2021 when they changed their name from Total to Total Energy, and tried through this change of name and through this big advertising campaign to make people believe that they had changed, that they were now a company like with multiple energy and not only fossil fuels, and also trying to make people believe that they were committed to energy transmission, that they were committed to get to net zero, etc., and also making a lot of promotion of gas as a clean fuel, a bridge fuel for the transition, and also about agrofuels being also something very important for energy transition. And so for us, all of this is greenwashing and is, legally speaking, misleading commercial practices, because Total is misleading consumer about the reality of its activity and about its products. Because the fact is that Total is still, although they have a bit of activity of producing renewables, it's really minor. Like 90% of their production of energy still comes from fossil fuels. More than 70% of their investment is still in fossil fuels. And also, of course, as you know, gas is not a clean energy. It's also a fossil fuels with a lot of climate impacts, but also impacts on the environment and on the communities, and the same also for agrofuels. So this case is quite advanced because we have had also Total used the same procedural attempts to kill the case, but we directly won this procedural against this procedural maneuver in 2023, and now just 1 month ago, or at the beginning of June, in reality, just some weeks ago, we had the hearing on the merits of the case, so really on the file itself. And this was a hearing that lasts for more than 30 hours. And we will have the ruling in October, on October 23rd.
Thank you. So I think, if I get you correctly, and if just to try and simplify this for our audience, is that this greenwashing is a process of giving, if I could call it a process, but it's generally giving false impressions or misleading information about how a company's products are friendly to the environment. So in this case, Total Energies trying to make the public think that things like gas that they are exploring are green energy. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. And in France and in Europe, it's illegal to mislead consumer about green commitment or commitment on the environment and on climate. And so that's why we used this law to bring. So it's a different law than the one we use for the case against EACOP. And so what we hope is that Total will be condemned to take out this communication and advertisements they had, but also we are asking also that for future communication, it would be forbidden for them to communicate like that they were in this misleading way, because Total is gaining from this this brainwashing, because people think they have changed, and it's not the truth. So they cannot benefit. We think they cannot benefit from it, and also that the energy transition itself is delayed by this greenwashing.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very important case that we'll be keeping our eyes peeled on. I want to come back to you, Lucien. Would you consider, first of all, greenwashing as an attempt at pushback, at trying to win public sympathy, maybe, for lack of a better word? And what are you seeing in the climate litigation space in Africa, especially?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Africa's got a different set of issues and crises that are being looked at when it comes to climate change. Africa is one of the least emitting continents in the world. I think it emits, less than 4% annually. And so, when there is this notion now of how we can try and lock Africa in to an energy source that is still connected to the oil and gas or the fossil fuel industry, they have to make it in a way that is palatable for people to believe that, Total is potentially doing and supporting countries in developing in Africa. And that narrative is becoming clearer and clearer. We are at a point now where, if you look at different reports, you're looking at about 1,000 projects coming online, within the oil and gas sector. And so it's clear, what the idea is, to try and bring Africa and lock them into the fossil fuel industry, for the next 20, 30, and maybe 40 years. So in light of that, of course, this brings a whole new area of litigation, particularly around climate. Now, the one thing that's really important to understand is on the African continent, we define climate change litigation a little bit differently to the global north. We're not looking at it from a perspective of a strict adaptation mitigation style litigation. We're actually looking at more from a climate risk perspective and how that might potentially impact socioeconomic rights, civil and political rights, environmental rights, and other key environmental principles that you could extract from those different rights and principles internationally. And so, looking at from that particular context, then there's actually a very good textbook drafted about this. It's called Climate Litigation Jurisprudence in Africa, which is seemingly putting this idea across that, we're not litigating like the global north would. But of course, we're developing our own unique Afrocentric ideas around climate litigation. So what you've seen is a body and mix of these different type of litigations that are coming across the African continent. And of course, yes, some of them are still your typical administrative law cases, which are great, but we've got other cases coming across. So Maybe to give some figures, from what we understand, our litigation has increased significantly. I think about 5 years ago, you could maybe have a handful of climate litigation cases. Now, you could look at it from close to 100 cases if you really delved down and went to the courts and saw what was being applied and submitted and filed by various law organization, NGOs, and other activists. Agreed, most of the cases currently right now are your administrative cases. So, trying to stop the projects coming online because it's going to violate particular rights. So, for example, you've got the Shell case in South Africa, which a lot of people have heard about. You got the Lamu port case around the coal fire power station that wanted to be developed. You've got various cases in Senegal around coal fire power stations as well. You've got the Recon Africa case in Namibia. You've got a couple of other court cases in Zambia and in Zimbabwe. My comrade Juliet, she mentioned cases in Mozambique as well. And so you've got this huge wave of basically your typical type litigation that are trying to stop any project from coming online so that we don't lock in. But then some of the more innovative cases that we're currently seeing, there's now a case in Kenya led by Natural Justice that is essentially asking the Kenyan government to actually go and request funding from the Loss and Damages Fund. That's sitting at the UNFCCC systems and structures. You've got class actions now being developed as well in Kenya, which is really fascinating and great. And those cases are all linked around, damages to people's livelihoods, to their socioeconomic rights. People's livelihoods are just disappearing before their eyes because of extreme weather events. And then, of course, you've got these larger regional cases that are also coming online. So, obviously, speaking about the EACOP case, you've now got a new case as well, an advisory opinion brought before the African court. I think it's the first time in the African history where you had, I think, over 40 or 50 organizations organizing to file this petition before the African court, which is essentially asking governments of in Africa, what are their obligations in terms of international conventions when it comes to the climate crisis on the African continent. So there really is a myriad of cases that are coming online, and it's really great to see that it's led by a lot of African organizations, and of course, developing our own, as I said, Afrocentric jurisprudence when it comes to climate litigation.
Thank you, Lucian. And I think that's interesting that just 5 years ago there was a handful, and now we're talking about 100 or so cases. I want to imagine that there's been pushback. So I just wanted to also still, while we're still on this topic, what are the most, in your view, effective tactics you've seen big oil companies use to avoid accountability?
Yeah. So essentially, there's two ways. There's going directly after activists and non-profit organizations, CSOs, CBOs, and trying to hold them accountable, inverted commas, in one way or the other. So, typically the tactics are first what we call slap suits. So this is a litigation process which will bog down activists and organizations into litigation for the next, 15 years, which then allows the larger organizations, the large oil companies, to continue doing and damaging the environment and people's livelihoods. What we have seen is there's now we've seen this type of strategy happening in Senegal. We've seen it happening in South Africa. We've seen it happening in East Africa as well. And the cases are varied. It's everything from defamation cases to vexatious litigation, again, inverted commas, to false information being led. And the problem is these slap suit processes. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars or rands in South Africa, particularly when then, as a small activist, really trying to protect your environment, obviously it's quite worrying when you get a lawsuit filed against for 200 million rand, for example. So that is quite worrying, and is something that's certainly increasing. Then, of course, we've got the direct assault and livelihoods attack on community members. We know in South Africa and in other parts of the African continent that activists are being killed, assassinated, falsely arrested, being smear campaigns against them, all in the name to stop to stop this movement that we're trying to gain momentum on the African continent, where we want sustainable development. We don't want development that's going to harm communities.
Thank you, Lucien. I want to come back to you, Juliet. We know that the United States of America is very influential, not just in the global north, but around the world. And with Trump coming back in office and global politics shifting towards fossil fuels, how is this affecting climate litigation strategy in Europe?
Well, for now, it's not directly affecting litigation strategy, I would say. It's maybe a bit too soon. But what is for sure is that for the past 6 months, there have been a big push for so-called simplification in Europe and in France. So basically, they are coming with new law to deregulate, to destroy the law that has been already adopted and sometimes even already implemented to protect people and to protect the environment, so being social rights, environmental rights, etc. So concretely, there is a big attack against what would be the equivalent of the French duty of vigilance law at the European level, a directive on corporate and social sustainability and due diligence that has been adopted last year. It was now supposed to be just transposed into national law in the different European Union member states. But now they are just trying to destroy this directive. And what's crazy, what we see is that the companies, so basically there is like a vicious circle, like the extreme right and the lobby of transnational corporations are putting pressure on governments and on the European Union to derail these laws. And they are already using this in court. So there was a case against a French company, La Poste, that was in appeal. And the lawyer, who was the former prime minister, who was the prime minister when the duty of vigilance law was adopted, he did all his pleadings saying that the French law of duty of vigilance should now be interpreted in this new context of simplification, and that we should think of protecting the competitivity of French company, etc., etc. And so using the fact that the European Union was deregulating, and they are already using it as an argument in court. In that specific case, we were very happy to see that the judge didn't follow this argument, and they confirmed the condemnation of La Poste. So we also hope that the judge will help us be a barrier against this attacks on our rights.
Thank you. As you're speaking, I remember in the US, there have been situations where some institutions, like the environmental institutions, are being defunded in some cases. So their mandate becomes weakened. And in some cases, laws are being altered, as you said. So what do you think the courts could do?
Well, the court, like theoretically, the court could do a lot, but it really depends on the judge you have. So, as I said, in this case of La Poste, the appeal court confirmed the condemnation, and they didn't listen to this argument about deregulation. But we also saw in a very different case, it's not about climate litigation, but with other organizations, we filed a case against the Salon du Bourget. It's like an event to to promote the arms industry, to sell planes and arms to the world. And so we filed a case to forbid Israeli companies to sell and to buy weapons there because it was contributed to the genocide in Palestine. And in this case, not only the court refused and denied our request, but both the French first instance and the appeal court, they condemned us. So we are several organizations to pay 9,000 euros to the company that was organizing this event. So we can see also sometimes that some judges are also following some politics, and so it's very worrying because this level of condemnation, of financial condemnation of civil society organization, of course, it's a deterrent for organization to file case, and so it's really very worrying.
Thank you, Juliet. Lucien, as natural justice, you pride yourselves as being lawyers for the community and the environment, and something that perhaps the connection that people don't get when we're talking about climate litigation is that a lot of this kind of work is for the communities themselves, who are not usually able to take such big companies to court. And I'm wondering, how do you ensure communities aren't just passive beneficiaries but active participants in these litigation processes?
Yeah, I mean that's a critical question, because essentially this work is for communities, to continue their way of life, and for them to live in a sustainable way that they have a right to choose how they want to live. So, there are a couple of ways of doing this. The one thing that's really important is a lot of lawyers, jump on board to come through and do this amazing litigation case, but then nothing happens afterwards, which is very different to how like natural justice operates in a couple of other large organizations who work regionally. The idea really is to work with communities for a couple of years to build the community's empowerment around understanding what the law is, to sensitize communities around particular strategies and ideas, to help them develop their concepts and their heritage. We have this amazing process in natural justice called the bio-community protocol, which is essentially amplifying, who communities are in a particular legal way within the Nagoya Protocol system. Which is a system that was developed through one of the international conventions on biodiversity. And so, you try and bring and amplify the communities as much as possible outside of the courtroom. And then you bring them, of course, together with you along this journey of potential litigation that will then support their ideas and their concepts and their notions of what they believe, that their land and how their land should be managed and developed. And I think it's a very unique style, rather than just go gun-ho, trying to win some sort of judgment that never becomes enforceable. So natural justice, we typically would work with communities, for 5 to 7 years, sometimes a bit longer, sometimes a bit shorter, depending on what the requirements are. And then the other thing as well, which is really key, is the advocacy processes and strategies that are developed at the organizational level. A lot of people have this idea that litigation is a binary victory or loss, and it's not. You can have a very powerful strategic litigation case where you might not be victorious, but you have the same impact because maybe the legislator or parliament or somebody decides, well, in fact, we do need to change the legislation. You might have some amazing cases with the most outstanding jurisprudence that was developed and written that sits in somebody's desk and nothing gets implemented at the executive or legislative level. And so when you look at strategic litigation, when you want to bring communities in, that advocacy, that understanding of what is needed to be achieved from litigation, from the advocacy plan, becomes absolutely pinnacle in terms of how communities can get involved and how they want to move forward. some of the really great ways that we've seen communities being involved in litigation cases is, through this by community protocol process, bringing them into spaces where they can have a voice, which I think is really key. So, involving them at the public participation processes, getting expert opinions from traditional leaders is a fundamentally crucial aspect. I always say there was this really great saying from one of the community leaders in South Africa, and they made the statement along the lines of, if you saw the Vatican, and then you found gold underneath the Vatican, would you go and start mining it? And obviously, most people would say no. Of course, we need to respect the Catholic religion. And then this community leader said, well, my ocean is my Vatican. And it's things like that that really empower communities to speak out and to have their voices, when they have lawyers backing behind them, to give them an opportunity to have these amazing statements, to provide them with sensitization around the law. It absolutely, all of that underpins it. And then maybe the last thing I would say, after advocacy, of course, one of the other important bits is funding. If you're ever looking at strategic litigation or any advocacy activity on the African continent, there has to be some sort of funding. Because if you don't have funding, then of course, an activity can only last 2-3 years. And not this long-term change that we're seeking on behalf of communities and organizations who are looking for a more sustainable future in Africa.
Thank you, Lucian. Actually, on your last point about funding, it's actually one of the things we attempted to tackle in our last episode with a lawyer from Pan-African Lawyers Union, that a lot of the climate litigation is funded by charity because the communities themselves are not capable of getting their hands on the kind of money that can allow lawyers to litigate at that level. So, Juliet, I want to ask you a similar question to that twist, because I know that Friends of the Earth have been doing a remarkable job across the continent, and particularly Friends of the Earth France, with what they're doing with regards to this EACOP project. So is there anything you want to add to what Luciana said, and particularly what role can frontline communities play in shaping these legal battles?
For me, it's very essential, like the role of frontline communities, because they are as the name says it, they are on the front line. They are the one directly suffering the violations, and so they are the one who should, maybe they're not equipped to shape the legal strategy, but they need to be directly involved to inform the case and also to give legitimacy to it. It's very important for me, for us, as Friend of the Earth, we have already we couldn't like physically be supporting communities everywhere that are affected just only by Total or of course of all the transnational corporation, but also we never act before there is someone directly in the country that is mobilized and that is asking for our support, because it's on this basis that we are guided by what the community want, what they need. Then it's of course an exchange. We build together. We explain. We try to explain in our best way what are the challenges, because of course in courts there is a big difference between what you can ask in a campaign and what you can ask in court, because in court you are you have the constraint of what is it in the law. So for instance, we have always combined our litigation strategy against EACOP and also the campaign advocacy strategy, media strategy that is also combined to fight against this project. And of course, also in the mobilization on the ground is essential. Also because otherwise, Total is also trying to say that the Stop EACOP fight is just a neo-colonialist fight, that is, organization from the north that are just trying to say to Uganda or Tanzania what they should do or not do. And so it's very important to visibilize the voice of the communities, the voice of the people on the ground, to see that it's not just like radical environmentalist organization in the north that want to fight this project is the people in Uganda, in Tanzania, in East Africa more globally that don't want this project and that are fighting also for alternatives.
Thank you so much, Juliet. I will give both of you an opportunity to give us any last comments, and then we bring this to a close. Maybe starting with you, Lucien.
Yeah, just well, thank you for you to provide us with this opportunity to talk about, the key issues around climate litigation, SLAP suits, community involvement. I think what's really key right now is you're seeing a lot of movements being developed on the African continent. You've got organizations like the Environmental Lawyers Collective for Africa Initiative. You've got the African Climate Platform that's being pushed in certain parts of the African continent. And you've got just it's actually incredible to see what's happened in the last year and a half, where you have a lot of NGOs, a lot of organizations, a lot of community members, activists banding together to really make a stand around, climate change, what it means for the African continent, and how we need to hold corporations, governments, and actors who seek, to impact communities in a negative way. So it's a very exciting time. It's a very challenging time as well. But we're hoping, we're hoping that we're going to be victorious on all fronts. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet.
I want to maybe say to everyone, well, please stay together, because the companies are trying to divide us, to divide communities. It's very difficult also to keep this fight from the distance. It's a lot of resource, a lot of money. Also, the communities are scattered all over in different districts and without a smartphone and things like that. So it's very difficult to maintain this communication. And the companies and the government are taking advantage of that. So we should do our best to stay together, to also continue to have hope despite of some setback that we are suffering. But we are also hoping for victories. Just next week we will have a ruling in France to see if we can or not, if the judge will force or not Total to communicate some key documents for the case. As I said, we have also this other ruling on the greenwashing case. And also I want to say again that I really admire the courage of affected communities, but also civil society organization and activists in Uganda and Tanzania and in many other countries in Africa that are really continue the push against this project despite all the intimidation, all the threats, all the attacks and arrests that they are facing. So really thank you and really a big admiration to all that is done.
Thank you. That's a good point to end it. Thank you, Lucien and Juliet, for this enlightening conversation. To our listeners, climate litigation isn't just about legal battles. It's about people, resilience, and the fight for a livable future. The cases we've discussed today remind us that the law can be a tool for transformation, but not only a tool for transformation, but real change. Once again, I want to thank our guests, Lucien and Juliet, for such an inspiring conversation. Episode 10 is a wrap.